So yes, my name is Monika. My last name is Mona Metzentin, so I go by Monika. I'm the Director of Engagement at MCASB. And I'm glad to welcome you here today. I'm very glad we have this partnership, so we actually have a real auditorium where we can hold our talks. The vision is that this will be full one of these days. So let's lay out the groundwork. This is the second in our installment of speeches, and our speaker today is being Gilsdorf. She is here as part of an exhibition called Being Gilsdorf, Soft Actor, curated by Brooke Calloway, who is waving over there. And it's part of the Exchange series. And the Exchange series features alternative art spaces. In this current installment, it's a very alternative art space in that it is an online art magazine, to which Bean is the chief editor and also a contributing writer. But besides that, she is an artist in her own right as well, and her work kind of touches upon these different realms of being a writer, an editor, and a visual artist. Now for the achievements, I have to look at my little cheat sheet because other people can write things much nicer than I do. The main element of her work that we will see is that she uses a lot of appropriation, working with existing images and turning them into something new. Her work has been included in exhibitions at Wattis Institute for Contemporary Arts in San Francisco, the American Textile History Museum in Lowell, Massachusetts. Did I say that right? Lowell? And the Holter Museum of Art in Helena, as well as exhibition spaces in Poland, and by that you will learn, England, Italy, China, and South Africa. She has been nominated for the SECA Award at SFMOMA in San Francisco and for the anonymous Was a Woman Award in New York. Her writing has been included, besides in Art Practical and Daily Servings, which are her two main outlets. She's also been included in Art 21 magazine, Art Forum, Bomb, Freeze, and the Miami Rail. She got her MFA from the California College of the Arts in San Francisco in 2011, and currently she's living in Warsaw, where she is a Fulbright fellow in creative writing. I'm very much looking forward to this talk. I have not seen it or heard it, but she's been part of our programming now for the third day, and I've got a glimpse into what she's doing. I'm very excited to have been here. And on a little side note, if you want to do a hands-on workshop with her, I think we have a couple spots open tomorrow evening at our third Thursday studio at the museum. So if that's of interest to you, go to our Facebook event page or our webpage and sign up. Bean, it's yours. Thank you.
I want to start by thanking you guys for coming on this lovely afternoon before it starts to rain. Before we begin, I just want to say we are, because we're a smaller group, I think we only have an hour in this space. I don't think I want to wait till the end to do a Q&A, so let's just chime in whenever you have a question. Just jump right in. So I want to start briefly here. I work mainly in textiles, and there's a really good reason for that. This is my great-grandmother. This woman here is my grandmother and her sister, and my mother and her sister. And my great-grandmother was a professional seamstress in England. She sewed clothes for her entire family as a child, and then when she married and emigrated to the United States, she sewed professionally, including one of her clients was Grace Kelly before she became Princess Grace in Philadelphia. She taught my grandmother to sew, and all of the things that they're wearing in these pictures, they made themselves. So my grandmother made the suit that she is wearing and the suit that her sister is wearing. So I grew up in this sewing family. I was always around textiles. I never had a formal education in it. It was more just that it was around me all the time, and so I just picked it up the way that you would pick up, say, eating with a knife and fork, or making your bed, or whatever. It was just what my family did. It was around me all the time. But I sewed in high school, and I made some of my own clothes, but when I started to develop an arts practice, I started sewing things that were really different. So what I'm going to do in this talk is just walk you through some of the work I've made in the last 5 years. Most of it is in textiles. There's some deviation that has to do with my writing and editing. But this is a group of small dolls that I made fairly early on after I went to graduate school. The biggest doll here is about 18 inches high. And I started to work with images from the Civil War. And I was really interested in this because I had been playing with images from these mass market history books that Monica mentioned, appropriating images. Because to me, it was a space that was not really accessible. I grew up poor. I grew up like super blue-collar family. Everything that was in history books seemed like it belonged to someone else. It was, this grand valorization, that tradition of men, people who had come over on the Mayflower or who had, traveled across the United States and built these empires, because that's who we put in history books, right? Like the people who succeeded. And I felt kind of shut out from that, and so I started to work with these images as a way to just kind of find my place in it, but also to disrupt them in a way, like kind of cut them down a little bit. So these are all images from the Civil War, and what I did was I took the photographs, and where they're cut off was where they were cut off originally in the photograph, and I added their bodies back in, but using reproduction textiles. So there's kind of a play with not just historical imagery, but the way that we express history through pattern and through textile. Here's a close-up. And another one. So when I was in school, one of the things that I started to do was to go back to a kind of long-standing tradition in my family, aside from the clothing making, which was quilt making. So I had actually been working for a long time in big scale pieces, but for a very different purpose. And when I started to go back into that again, I wanted to play a little bit more with these ideas from history and the idea of maybe taking images and doing things to them that weren't intended by their original makers or authors or people who took history really seriously. So this piece is about 200 inches wide. Sort of depends on how I install it. I can install it a couple different times. The textiles are scanned from these appropriated images and then digitally printed onto, this is onto linen, backed with satin, finished with fringe, and then this is gold paint on the wall. And this is kind of a representative image of the way that I started to think about these historical images, because to me, I look at this image and I don't see something that's like, oh, grand tradition of history. I see this weird horse with this giant brown eye, and I see an image that is actually pretty much like porn. Like, look at, all those, like, this is like a porn pose, right? Mm-hmm. So what I wanted to do was kind of heighten that, bring that out for people to really like see it, push it forward into their faces. So I painted it on the wall. And it's called Horse's Ass. And actually, this is how people find my website. You can look at the analytics and see what people have Googled to find your website. And probably once a month, someone's found my website by Googling Horse's Ass. I don't know what they were really looking for. So I was doing image after image after image in these various kind of permutations. And then it became time for my MFA show. And I don't know if you guys are used to showing with your colleagues, but at the California College of the Arts, they pair you with one other student, and they give you a space, and they paired me with my friend Jonathan, which was great, but he's an amazing artist. And I felt a lot of pressure to like really bring my game, because he's good. So I decided, instead of making a bunch of separate pieces, I'm going to make one big piece. So this is called Glory Glory. It's 21 and a half continuous yards of fabric. It was the first time that I had ever printed on polyester instead of cotton or linen. Are you guys familiar with digital printing processes at all? Do any of you work textiles? I thought there was a hand going
No.
up. Okay, so just a little bit of a technical background. When you print digitally on a natural fiber, it's just like printing on a piece of paper. You feed the fabric in, the head goes back and forth, and it sprays the ink onto the fibers. Printing on polyester is a little bit different. It's a heat transfer process. And so I actually had to kind of like farm this out to a printing house, which was the first time I'd ever done that. It was like a month before the show. I was really sweating it. And this is all made from slices taken from these American history books. It starts as a flag on a flagpole here that's attached to the wall with a chain. Backed again with the red satin, finished with gold fringe. And what I really wanted to bring out in this piece were a couple different things. First, I wanted this sense of like exhaustion, like, oh, these images, we've seen them so many times and we're so like beat over the head with like, America, it's so great, like what an amazing nation, look at our glorious history. But I wanted to come down and touch the floor. There's an anthropologist, I can't remember her name, but she wrote a book about what she calls contamination behaviors. And something like, she uses the examples of eating spaghetti in bed or putting muddy boots on the kitchen table. So contamination behaviors are anything where you take a thing that's supposed to be kind of precious and you do something to it that kind of makes it dirty or undercuts its value. So I wanted to make this flag, this beautiful flag, you know, lovely fabric, lustrous satin, gold fringe, and let it touch the floor. You know, let it hit a space where it might get dirty or somebody might step on it. It's hung around the space on these shorter flagpoles. And you'll notice that the images kind of drop out where it's draped. Like you can't just see every part of it very clearly. But also, I didn't go to undergrad for art. I went to undergrad for literature, and then I studied linguistics afterwards. And it kind of comes in and out of my work all the time. And when I was thinking about these images, when you look through these books, as I did, like over and over and over again, and you're pulling these images out, you start to notice that there's a lot of repetition in the way that the images are like formally composed. And one of the ways that they repeat is there's, in these American history images, there's a lot of pointing because of manifest destiny, right? Like that space over there, we're going there, it's ours, it's a gesture of claiming it. And so whenever I had an image of that, I wanted to have I was thinking of these as characters. I wanted to have the characters name the space, but I didn't want to have them name it like clearly and directly. I wanted it to be kind of that same kind of contamination behavior, something that was kind of like lower. So they don't just say America, they say, ugh, America. So it's like they're coming from the solar plexus. It's kind of like spitting this out, like, oh, America. You know, just to underscore the idea of like, this is painful and there's kind of a sense of exhaustion to this. And so that's all silkscreen, the letters. And all the other characters, even the train, they keep up the rhythm of this by saying the entire time, because in linguistics, when you study things that aren't actually words, like or ah, they're placeholders. So when you're talking to somebody back and forth and you say, it means don't take my place. Something is coming, right? So there's slices of this that just say, they're placeholders. They're moving through space, but they're not actually getting anywhere. And then when somebody points off, they, America. And then a really great thing happened to me. I graduated, and for the 7 MFA granting institutions in the Bay Area, they award one artist a year-long studio residency at the Headland Center for the Arts, which I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. If you're up in the San Francisco Bay Area and you have a little extra time, definitely check it out. It's amazing. So you have to drive all the way out to the coast in Marin, and it is in a public or a national park that used to be part of an army base. And I was the person who got the award from CCA, so I was super lucky. But I moved from a smallish studio to an even smaller studio. So the idea of making this giant work was suddenly gone, collapsed. But the really interesting thing that happened within that was that I had this studio space, and I'm from Philadelphia, so I'm from the complete opposite coast. And I had this studio space, and it was long and skinny, and it had one window, and that window looked out onto the line of a hill, and over that hill was the ocean. So I was literally at the end of America. Like all this gesturing, pointing through space, moving, manifest destiny, claiming it, I was at the end of that, literally, physically. And this happened at the same time that the whole Occupy movement was starting, and there was a lot of talk about, like wholesale changes of systems that were inadequate or corrupt. And I started to think a lot more about specifically the materials that I was using and what they might mean. So socially, what does it mean to have a fabric that's like this kind of like a swimsuit fabric, like slippery, cheap, reflective, kind of like disco. If there's something a little bit sexy to it, but also kind of like déclassé. Or this really nice wool fabric, substantial, smooth, soft, and also what those fabrics do. So like, where would you wear a fabric that was, part of your clothing, like something like this, like in a mini skirt or a tube top, versus where would you wear, a wool, heavy wool suiting? Well, suiting, suits, business, capitalism, and then this sort of weird space of, parties and discos and clubs, things like that. So I started to think about kind of the social uses of fabric, and I continued printing on the polyester. Yes?
I have a question for you about sourcing fabric. Do you actually just shop at fabric stores and kind of see what's available and how that resonates with you, or do you have an idea of what you're going to create and then go out and try to source? Like, for example, you talked about the shiny disco fabric.
Both. That's a great question, and the answer is really both. So sometimes I get ideas for things, and it's like it arrives in my brain mostly finished, right? Kind of like Athena from the mind of Zeus. And for that, I'll be like, okay, like for the back of Glory Glory, the long flag, I knew I wanted like perfect lipstick red satin. That was the only thing that was going to like finish this piece. But then when I go to the store and I buy the red satin, of course on the next table there's like some weird spangled fabric that's catching my eye, and I'll be like, yeah, just a yard of that, please, So I do both. I go to stores looking for specific things. Sometimes I don't find them. And then usually while I'm there, magpie-like, I will pick up something else that catches my eye. I used to have this terrific stash of fabric, and then for moving all over the world, I had to give most of it away, so I try not to collect too much.
So your work has a really heavy historical context, and you're talking about this piece. Do people bring up any sort of like jailbird kind of reference, because it has that black and white look to it? The traditional prison garb, perhaps?
No one has yet, but I love other people's interpretations of my work.
Yeah, okay.
Please.
Well, if we're going with associations, the long flag, to me, I think of the Bayou tapestry and how it's hung around, and I really appreciate your draping and touching the floor and making it a little more anti-heroic, even though that probably was made by women too.
It was made by women. So are you familiar with this Bayou tapestry? Okay, some yeses, some nos. It's called a tapestry. It's actually an embroidery. It's like 30 some meters long, 130 meters long.
Well, so I think in feet, which is about 230 feet.
Okay, it's enormous essentially. It was embroidered by a very large group of women over time. It was made in 1042. It's one of the
1070.
Okay.
Which is after the Norman invasion.
I never get numbers.
I know.
But basically, it's one of the oldest surviving historical textiles, and it depicts these battle scenes from the Norman conquest. And actually, I I was an exchange student in France when I was 16. And just by happenstance, they took us on a bus tour out there, and I saw it, and it changed my life. It's Bayeaux. And if you Google it, if you're interested in this kind of thing, you should definitely take a look, because it's a fascinating, fascinating piece of history, textile history, skilled production, and it's amazing that it even survived. So I worked like this for a little while, and these flags, the last flag was flag for Manifest Destiny. This is flag for Regarded Flags. They're all flag for something in their titles, and they're all about scaled to my body. So basically my wingspan, like I could hold all of them up, within certain degrees. And they're all draped on those short flagpoles, just like Glory Glory was. And they're all backed with different colored satins. And something that you can almost see in this image. If you look at the very top edge here, you can see the red line that lines this. The satin backing, there's this technique that you can use to line a jacket. And you actually line the jacket from the outside, and then you turn it inside and finish sewing it up. It's called bagging a lining. And it actually gives you a little bit of an extra room so that your jackets are really comfortable and the lining doesn't squeeze your arms or anything like that. And the effect of using the technique on something flat like this is it gives me basically 1/8 of an inch of that fabric to roll to the edge and then stitch all the way around. So you just get this tiny little subtle bit of color. And I still really enjoy using those dressmaking skills that I learned as a kid and just employing them in totally different ways. Flag for parade queens. And again, so wool suiting, pinstripes, satin, and then the digitally printed image in polyester. And a lot of these images I find strange or in some ways grotesque or really problematic. For example, this is called Flag for American Beauty. It's Miss America being crowned. American Beauty is the name of the red rose that they give to every Miss America. But that's such a problematic image for me because we don't know how to read that without its original context. Unless we read a whole book about the history of the Miss America pageant or something like that. Problems. I have problems with American history and the way that we just put these images forward. This is Flag for Kennedy's Before. And the other half of this image was originally, it's JFK and Bobby Kennedy and a cousin. And you can see this has a kind of almost kind of like a citron yellow, and it kind of sags a little bit at the bottom, but you can see that color pop. And the red is gold. Flag for generals. And then I started to work big again. I got a little bit of extra space, moved into a new studio after the year was over, and I was invited to do a 3-person show in Brooklyn, and this was one of the pieces that went into that show. It was actually supposed to have a standard brown base metal flagpole here, but it was being installed in the middle of a snowstorm, and the UPS truck just never showed up when we had to open the show. So it's actually hung differently than I had originally intended it or imagined it, but I like it like this. This is Flag for Disasters, and again wool is kind of super cheap. You don't even like to touch it. It doesn't feel good. This fabric is terrible. The polyester printing and then satin and the gold satin back. And then something strange happened to me. I went on an 8-week residency to Banff, Canada to participate in what was billed originally as something called Experimental Comedy Training Camp. which seems really left field, but I had been thinking about my work as like absurd or satire, and I was like, okay, maybe this is a good place for me. I applied, I got in, I got there, and then the guy who was running the thematic residency was like, yeah, we're gonna do performance. And I was like, but I'm not a performance artist. And there were a couple other people who also were not performance artists, and he was like, tough shit. So over the course of 8 weeks, we did 13 performances. 3 of them were open to the public. We also did open mic nights at like the townie bar. Banff is a ski town. So you can imagine what a bunch of weirdo artists, how welcome we were at this, like, you know, Joe's bar. We were there for, I think, the first couple of weeks for open mic night, and then it became apparent that somebody was going to get punched in the face, and we stopped going. But I got back to San Francisco, and all of a sudden I didn't know what to do with myself because I had sort of alienated myself from my own work. You know, I had this like really clear working process, and then I had taken myself out of that milieu, and then I was back again, and I was like, okay, do I want to just go back to my old way of production, or do I want to do something new? Decided to do something new for a little while. So I opened a living history museum in my apartment in San Francisco. It was open to the public 3 days a week by appointment. And I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of living history, but basically, do you know about Colonial Williamsburg? Okay, so in Virginia, Williamsburg, Virginia, you can go, and there's a town that's like, it's supposed to be the 1600s or something, and everybody's dressed in costume, and they're making wagon wheels, and they're churning butter, and they're, I don't know, making ice cream, and you can go on these tours, and they talk to you like they're in that time. There are no computers, there's no segways or anything like that. Like, there's not even kids jumping rope. And the idea of that is that it's supposed to show you history as it was lived, right? It's supposed to make this like living picture for you to actually like wander around within and participate with. And because I live in San Francisco, and there's this sense of like this time moves so fast there, you know, every day it seems like there's some sort of weird new technological invention. There's an app on your phone that you can like get something new delivered, or somebody will come to your apartment and do something, or you know, this cloud storage and all this stuff. It's like, it blows my mind, but it makes me feel like time is advancing faster, and it's speeding up the sense of history. So history isn't like 200 years ago anymore. History's like a month ago, or like a year. Like, can you remember what life was like before Twitter, or WhatsApp, or Snapchat? Like, so that was the sense that I had, and I wanted to kind of capitalize on that a little bit and play with it. Mostly I just didn't want anybody to sit on my bed. So I made these stanchions. People would come. I built a website for it. It is, in fact, the world's smallest living history museum. I call it a life-size diorama. I say that it recreates reality to the extent that the image becomes the standard by which reality is judged. So I'm basically playing myself, right? And I'm purporting to play myself, and that could be my past self from 5 minutes ago, it could be my past self from a month ago, but people show up, and because I had been doing these performances, and I had started to investigate improv, I treated the interaction with my visitors as a form of improv and a kind of collaboratively constructed form of like making history. So I would let the conversation be entirely guided by what the person wanted to talk about. And it usually happened pretty organically. I hung exhibitions. We had exhibition maps. You could see the layout of my apartment. I had a little gift shop in my closet. You opened the door and there was a bookshelf right there with a couple of things in it. I had like printed mugs. We had brochures. I would greet visitors down in the lobby of my apartment building with a clipboard, and I had in history, living history, they're not called guides or you know, staff or anything like that. You're called interpreters. So who better to interpret Bean Gilsdorf's life than Bean Gilsdorf? So I had a little name tag that said Bean Gilsdorf, lead interpreter. And the thing about living history is that you have a material culture to it. That's what is like, I think the biggest part of it is that you can not just look at these things, you can pick them up, you can touch them. So I had one door in my apartment, a closet door marked private, do not enter, but everything else was open. And I would tell people that, I would be like, this is a living history museum, so you are welcome to open cabinets and drawers and everything. So you could go into my bathroom and be like, okay, what kind of mascara does she use, and pick it up and inspect it. I actually had a man come and he took that really seriously, and he opened every drawer and every door and every cabinet, and he came into the kitchen and he opened my freezer and refrigerator, and I thought, oh my God, like, I've never felt more naked in front of someone than when I knew this man was like judging me by my condiments. He's like, oh, that kind of mustard. So this ran in my apartment from late June 2013 until I left for Poland in 2015 September. And if I move back to San Francisco, I plan to open it up again because I really enjoyed it. The shortest period that someone came was about 10 minutes, and the longest period was 2.5 hours. And when that guy left, I was like, thank God, because I'm starving. Like, gotta go now, buddy. Shortly afterwards, I was invited to do a solo show at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, Oregon. And the curator, when he invited me to do this, he said, you can do anything you want. And I was like, anything? And he was like, yep, anything. And I was like, okay. And he was like, well, we don't have a big budget. And I was like, fair enough. I had been growing a little bit frustrated with the fact that, I wear these different hats. I'm a writer, I'm an editor, I'm an artist, I'm a lead interpreter at a living history museum. I've been writing exhibition reviews for publications since 2008. And it has always felt like something that I do that's like to the side of myself, because I'm supposedly like, I'm supposed to be objective, and I'm supposed to have some kind of expert opinion and like bring all this art historical knowledge and that kind of thing. But really, it's still just me, just like it's me whether I put on the lead interpreter pin or not. And so what I decided to do in thinking about like, oh, I could do this, or I could do that, or I could build this thing, or I could finally make all those collages that I wanted to make, or I was going through my old sketchbooks, and I decided that instead of choosing one thing or another thing, I was going to do all of it. And so what I did was for 6 weeks, 6 days a week, I wrote a new 3-page exhibition review. And the exhibition review it had a title and a date, and it said that it was at the Feldman Gallery at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. And it was basically, if you stood on this side of the desk and read the exhibition review, it was basically describing work as though it were in that space. And space isn't small. So every day, a new 3-page exhibition review would go up on the front. They would take the previous day, put the 3 pages together, and put it on the back side in kind of a stack, so you could read the first page of the last one. And they would relight the gallery for me. I drove these people crazy. So if I said, there's a diptych on the west wall in this review, they would put 2 hot lights on the west wall. So every day when I sent them, so this was February 27th, 2014, every day when I would send them the new exhibition review for them to print, I would also send them a new lighting plan for the gallery, and they would have to get up on the ladders and move the lights around. And it was pretty funny because the show after mine was Luke Toyman's print show. And the crates there was like this period where nobody knew where the crates were. They had left Belgium, but there was some kind of snafu, and they didn't know if they were going to arrive on time. And then, we were coming to the end of the show, and I was talking to the curator, and he said, yeah, I'm kind of sweating it because the crates haven't arrived yet for the next show. And I was like, oh, because I was like totally in a rhythm by then. And I was like, oh, I could keep going. And he was like, no. So I think the gallery staff got pretty tired. But the interesting thing for me was that I used this as an opportunity, because I was writing about work that had been unrealized sitting in my sketchbooks. It was a way for me to reevaluate those ideas. And some of those ideas I had never been able to make because, for example, like I didn't have the technological capacity, or I didn't have the money to realize it. One of the shows in this run was, a 2-person all-day performance with identical twins, you know, like things like that. There were sound installations, sculptural installations, a series of paintings, a series of embroideries, like, so it really ran the gamut of media. And on the final day of the show, I reviewed the show. And I gave myself some bad reviews too. I was like, these ideas just don't feel finished. And then I felt comfortable going back into textiles again, but I wanted to come at it from another avenue. And so this is 2015. So once again, I was invited to do a 3-person show, actually with the same 2 people that I had worked with in Brooklyn, but in San Francisco this time. And I started to look back through some of this old imagery, and I wanted to continue working with these ideas of like finding some way into the original image, but in a way that made it kind of grotesque, or that undercut its power some way, or that, I don't know, manipulated it in a way that moved it aside from a kind of valorization. And because I've been living in California now for, I mean, if we don't count Warsaw, for 7 years, I feel really affected by the history of the political situation in California, particularly Ronald Reagan. And I grew up when Ronald Reagan was president. I was really young, and I remember my mother, she really hated his policies, and she felt like they were really detrimental to vulnerable populations and women and children. And I remember her ranting and raving about Reagan. So he occupies a really distinct place in my cultural and political consciousness. In fact, I mean, you can say I'm a little obsessed with him. So I started to make these pieces with Reagan, and this is about, I think this is about 85 inches wide, wool suiting, but this time, no satin backing, the edges aren't finished, they're raw. I wanted to have a totally different feel than the work that I had been producing before. But the figures themselves are stuffed. So here's a detail from kind of a side view. So they're sewn to the fabric backing and then stuffed with that same like white polyfill stuff that you would stuff with like a teddy bear or something like that. So they bulge out and they get kind of distorted and grotesque. And they also, you can see they create this kind of ripple effect because the fabric doesn't lay flat anymore. So this piece is double RR. This is glad hand. Ronald Reagan was 6 foot 4 inches high, and this is life size of him. And I started to experiment with just little maneuvers where, because I wanted these pieces to not have that like clean, hand-rolled, hem-finished, like kind of craftsmanship to them. I wanted them to feel different. So just little things like this, like coming out of the perimeter, crossing some kind of picture frame. And the only thing that's stuffed on this piece is his hand. Similarly, I started thinking about Arnold Schwarzenegger because of the same kind of thing. Like, started in Hollywood as an actor, crossed over this divide into the political sphere, but then there's always this sense of like, is he still just playing a role? You know, what's actually happening here? This is about, I think it's 36 inches by 36 inches. Questions? Yes, please.
Was there a reason when you started, was there a reason as to why you started fluffing them up?
Stuffing them?
Yeah, you didn't want them to lay out like from the fabric as if it was having a consequence now and then.
That's a really good question. So the question is why stuffing them, and do I want them to come out from that like flat picture plane as though they're coming from the past into the now, right? That's part of it for sure. The other part of it for me is that, you know, I've been working with these flat images for a really long time, but because I come from this sewing background, specifically originally clothing, I think in 3D. you know? So my impulse is always to move the flatnesses into three-dimensional space. But I think what it does too is like, it essentially, so you've got this, let's see if I can do this the right way. So you've got this flat image in a book, Ronald Reagan at a podium, waving goodbye from some political speech. This is while he was campaigning for president. And it's flat, but what I wanted to do was kind of like rehabilitate that image, like put it back into that physical space. And I think that that's one of the kind of like affective results of that, is that it does kind of bring it into the now, you know, to give that form again and to give it a sculptural shape. It makes you reckon with the image in a different way. And I think also you start to relate to that image when you're standing in front of it with your own body more, because it mirrors you, you know, it has the same kind of like shape and form. So, and this piece is just called Schwarzenegger. Apparently he has a collection of rings, and he was, in this picture, he was wearing this particular turquoise ring. It's called The Final Rolls. Please.
What do you do about picture rights?
I ignore them completely. I interviewed, as part of my job as a writer, I interviewed a filmmaker named Johan Greiman-Prez back in 2000, it was either 2009 or 2010. And he uses completely found footage. So he makes these beautiful films, and they're all found footage, which is to say, stolen. He's made one film that he actually managed to get all the rights for, but it was because he was working with a particular foundation. And I asked him, because I was, you know, kind of like in this nascent but similar situation, and I was like, you know, what do you do? Like, what happens? Are you going to get sued? Like, should I be thinking about this kind of thing? And he said, they'll never come after you until you start making money.
Richard Prince.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like, first of all, I'm never going to be making money off of any of this. So if they want to come after me, they can. The worst thing that they would do is maybe make me take an image down from the internet or something like that. But the other thing is that when I was living, years ago I lived in Portland, Oregon, and there was a great zine called Crap Hound. And it was run by a guy who's actually now down in LA named Sean Tetraci. And he would steal clip art images and compile them into these zines. They were usually 75 or 100 pages long, so they're pretty thick. He would arrange them thematically: sex, death, and telephones, you know, something like that. And there were 8 issues of these, and the very first one had this really long, beautifully written essay about fair use. And it was basically his standpoint, and I read this at a very kind of like formative age as an artist. You know, it was like that moment where it just sort of pierced my consciousness. But he basically talked about the fact that, like, we have images thrown at us all day: televisions, computer screens, billboards, print advertising in, you know, various ways. And he was like, I never asked for any of this. So if you put anything in front of me, it's mine to take. And I was like, yes. This is actually taken from an image of Arnold Schwarzenegger and Ronald Reagan standing next to each other at a cocktail party. And it's about 24 by 24. So that was the point at which I left for Poland. I got this fellowship to go study Polish contemporary art. There's a long story there, I'm not going to get into it. But while I was in Poland last spring, I got an email and then a Skype chat with Brooke, who's the curator at MCASB, and we started to talk about the potential to do this show here. And of course, Santa Barbara is where Ronald Reagan had his ranch, where he would go on vacations from the White House and then eventually retire there. And so when we were talking about doing this show, of course, I wanted to go back to Reagan again. So this is just a cell phone shot of the show, because we haven't had the professional images done yet. But there's 3 pieces in this show. They're all Ronald Reagan. But I wanted to approach the images even like differently again. So I always want to try and do something not necessarily different, but I want to feel like I am exploring new ideas or like moving forward in some way, investigating another aspect of my own practice and the way that I come at my ideas and dealing with these images. So, you know, when you think about Ronald Reagan, and you think about the fact that he's like this incredible symbol that the Conservative Party is, in the United States is still using, they still refer to him all the time, like, you know, as he's a paragon of this or that, even though they might not actually even be referring to what he actually did. Like, he's not even a person anymore, he's like a mythic space, he's a container for people to just sort of like put their ideas into and think, oh, Ronald Reagan, like, he would never want that. You know, or this is what Ronald Reagan would have done if he were still president today or whatever. It's like, he's not with us, folks. You know? But what do you think of when you think of Ronald Reagan? I think of his hair, because he had this pompadour, and it was like just so iconic. So of course I wanted to work with his hair. So there's a piece that is his hair blown up and it's stuffed again. So it actually it's hung from these flagpoles, because it needs to stand out from the wall because it takes up so much like space and volume. And then in the middle of the floor, because there's the Reagan Library here, I wanted to do something that sort of reflected that same feeling of like importance. But so there's a bust of Ronald Reagan, and it's fabric. The front is the digital printing on polyester. This green side fabric, it actually was my grandmother's fabric from the 1980s. It's this really kind of cute landscape fabric, woods and trees. And then there's kind of a dark pink wool suiting on the back. So it's a three-dimensional bust. What you can't see in this image is that, so the original image of Reagan, he's not facing you straight on in this picture. His body's at an angle. And so when I made the bust at an angle. So actually this side of the podium that he's sitting on, plinth, is wider than this side. So when you look at it straight on, it looks normal, but if you come to it at a little bit of an angle, you're like, why isn't that straight against the wall? You know, there's the sense of like wanting to fix it, and then you realize that you can't. And then the final piece in this show is this set of sculptures. They're, again, life-size, or actually a little bit larger. They're backed with a kind of a mid-teal wool suiting on the front. Again, these like unfinished edges, they're not clean and turned and, you know, hand-hemmed or anything like that, because I wanted them to feel like they were taken from a larger body, you know, like just temporarily like hacked off. And these are all Ronald Reagan's hands, and they're all from images of him doing that political wave. And it's called Six Waves. And we'll stop there, because we're right at time. Questions?
I have a question for you about where you appropriate your images from. Are these just, because you had your first series that was historical material from books, and then the Reagan images was hands, you just pulled off the web?
I actually have only ever made one piece from a digital image from the internet. Everything is from books. So, for example, in this piece, you can see that it's not just you know, black fabric from the hair. It's got all these different colors in it, and it's because it's blown up from the original image, which in books, of course, it's a four-color printing process: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And when you blow images up, you get to see the individual dots. And that's, I wasn't sure whether or not to go in there because I wasn't sure how we would run on time, but that's actually really important to me, that they all come from books, because to me what that indicates is that these images have already been vetted, they've been codified, they've been deemed important, and now create part of a visual archive of American history. And so, like, I actually want people to know, like, when you get up on this piece, like the closer you get to it, it's kind of ends up seeming blurry because of that blown up printing process. I want people to know that these are from books. that they were considered important enough to actually like cut down trees and print and like mass distribute. And the books themselves they're generally like super, they all are probably at a 5th to 8th grade reading level, like Time Life Home History Library Series. I actually have a book, and they're propaganda. They're propaganda for America, for an America that does not exist. You know, I got one book that's Our Greatest Century in Pictures for Young People. Like, that title alone tells you everything you need to know, right? So that's where the images come from. I don't necessarily have a problem with images from the internet. I just think they say something different when you blow them up, because you get the square pixels instead of the weird blown out dots. So.
Are you working on any more political pieces at the moment?
At the moment, no. Because I'm actually living in Warsaw and I don't have a studio there. But my grant is finished in a couple of months, and my plan is to come. I still have my studio in San Francisco, and my plan is to come back and work in the studio all summer. So I have a new series planned. It's kind of like the next step off of this. Yeah. Other questions?
Has being in Warsaw changed your point of view on what you want to say with works that are more political?
Yes. Being so far away and being in proximity to an entirely different culture who sees America through such a different lens. In Warsaw, actually, there's on one of the biggest streets, there's a statue of Ronald Reagan, and it's because they love Reagan. The Poles love Reagan, and it was because he was very supportive of them culturally. He couldn't do anything really politically for them, but culturally he was supportive of Poles when the Poles were living under communism, and it was if you know anything about Polish history, it was a very dark time. There were economic sanctions. I mean, people didn't have toilet paper. You know, that like there were serious social, political, and economic problems for Poland. They lived under martial law for the better part of a decade. They think Ronald Reagan is like this champion of human rights, right? And whereas like I think about Ronald Reagan, and I think about like welfare queens and the fact that he said that you could fit all of the waste from a nuclear power plant under a desk. You know, like that's what I think of. But to the Poles, he's like Superman. But also living in Poland for now the better part of 2 years, I have of course been reading a lot about Polish history. And absorbing a lot because it's just around all the time. Poles are very, very historically conscious. And I actually just had a visit with a curator in Poland, and he said, "Are you going to start to use images, Polish history?" And I thought that was such a great question, and I had already been thinking about it, and my answer was no, because I didn't grow up with it, and I'm interested in doing it, but at the same time, I worry about being like seriously culturally insensitive and misinterpreting something with an image that, I don't know, just would feel really disrespectful. Like, Poland is essentially my adopted country right now. And I would hate to, like, it's one thing for me to be like, yeah, America, thumbs down, because I grew up here, you know, and I've seen a lot of people suffer, both like personally and like culturally, socially, politically, with the policies that America has created and that we all live under. Whereas like Poland is something that I want to study and be aware of, but I don't know that I would ever understand enough to feel comfortable like making that kind of like interruption into their history, you know? So, other questions?
So you're offering a workshop tomorrow?
Yes, so Monica and I are going to be doing a workshop at 6 p.m. At the Museum of Contemporary Art here in Santa Barbara. And we are going to be talking about cultural icons and political imagery and sort of ways to kind of like get into that space and play with that in a way that I hope, gives people a sense of like power over the image. So we're going to be working with collage and then also a bit with fabric.
There are certain space limits, so please RSVP. You're very welcome.
Yeah, I think
But,
we
but
have
you
2
have-
spaces left.
Yeah. So. And people sometimes don't show up, so yeah.
But you can RSVP online,
Yeah.
either through the museum website or through the Facebook event.
Or just show up in case people don't show up, then you can slip in. Or we can just make room and put an extra chair.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank
Well-
you so much.